Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a retired Army mechanic receives a strange letter from a neighborhood he doesn't belong to, it kicks off a quiet war of power, paranoia, and property rights. What starts as a bold request for his garage turns into a chilling campaign of control, and he's not backing down. When the letter first showed up in my mailbox, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was another one of those pointless HOA newsletters that somehow find their way onto my land, even though I've never signed so much as a neighborhood waiver. But this one was different. The envelope was thick, the kind of thick that usually means trouble or lawyers, and the return address in the corner read, Willow Bluff Community Association. My eyebrows raised on instinct. I wasn't in Willow Bluff, not legally. Not geographically, not in spirit, that was for damn sure. Still, curiosity won out. I took the envelope inside, ripped it open, and started reading. It was addressed to me by name, Jared Miller, and written in that overly polite, passive-aggressive tone that only HOA board members and IRS auditors truly master. The message was short but heavy with arrogance. The board, under the guidance of President Karen Bradshaw, was requesting temporary use of my garage, my private 3-bay, steel-framed, built with my own damn hands garage for community equipment storage and seasonal use. They cited a lack of use on my part and encouraged me to consider the broader benefit to the neighborhood. That was their phrasing. Broader benefit. As if I owed something to a group of people who'd spent the last 5 years pretending I was some stubborn holdout squatter living just outside their picket-fenced utopia. I stared at the letter for a solid minute before letting out a short, humorless laugh. Then I took a picture of it, printed out a copy of my property deed, dug up the county GIS map, and included notarized confirmation from the land office. I packaged it all into a response and mailed it to the HOA headquarters, which, unsurprisingly, was just Karen's overly manicured mini-mansion down the street. I even included a sticky note that read, "Respectfully declined. Not part of your community, not interested in becoming one." I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, a second letter arrived, this one with 7 signatures at the bottom. Board consensus, it claimed. Same message, only with a little more bite. It is inappropriate for such a large structure to go unused when the community is in need, they wrote. This garage could serve as an excellent location for shared tools, seasonal decorations, and long-term storage needs. My jaw tightened as I read the line. As you are a neighbor to Willow Bluff, you should consider what's fair and reasonable for those around you. Fair and reasonable. I'm a retired Army mechanic with 3 acres of land, no HOA dues, and a healthy dislike for people who think committees solve everything. That garage wasn't some decorative shed. It was my sanctuary. Inside were 2 project cars in progress, a wall of tools organized with surgical precision, a welder, a hydraulic lift, and half a dozen machines I'd either fixed, built, or broken trying. Saying I don't use it was like saying a farmer doesn't use his barn just because he sleeps in the house. I called Karen directly. Big mistake. Her voice had that overly practiced calm, like a cruise ship director trying to convince everyone that hitting an iceberg was part of the experience. She insisted the request wasn't personal, just something the board thought would be a wonderful collaboration. I told her flat out I wasn't interested in collaborations, community projects, or the HOA's idea of property fairness. I ended the call before I said something that would have made me the subject of their next emergency meeting. By the following weekend, things started getting weird. A couple of neighbors I barely knew suddenly became chatty. One of them asked if I was planning on finally doing something with the garage. Another hinted that it was a shame to see such a structure go unused. I didn't say much in return, just nodded and went back to power washing my driveway. I wasn't stupid. I'd lived next to these people long enough to smell the beginnings of a pressure campaign. Karen wasn't going to take my no as a final answer. Not when she had 7 signatures and a growing list of busybodies whispering on her side of the fence. I knew exactly what was coming, and I had no plans to fold. But I'll admit, even I didn't expect what they'd try next. The next week kicked off like a weird neighborhood-themed episode of The Twilight Zone. I stepped outside on Monday morning with a coffee in hand, expecting to enjoy the quiet hum of desert birds and maybe fix the squeaky side gate. Instead, I found 3 strangers, clipboards in hand, neon vests on, standing right outside my fence line, pointing at my garage and scribbling notes like they were planning a demolition. I leaned against the porch railing and called out, "Can I help you folks?" The tallest of the trio, thin guy with a clipboard and the dead-eyed stare of someone who took HOA rules too seriously, turned around and flashed a laminated badge that read, Community Oversight Committee, which was funny because that wasn't a thing. Not legally. Not even on their website. We're just doing a visual inspection of bordering structures for structural compliance and visual harmony, he said. I let out a dry laugh. You're on the wrong property. He didn't even flinch. Your parcel is listed in our Community Transition Overlay documentation. It may fall under pending annexation status. May fall? I said. Buddy, this isn't a casino. You don't get to gamble on what land you think you own. I didn't wait for his reply. I walked back inside, printed out a fresh copy of my deed, highlighted the parcel number, and marched right back out. Here, I said, handing him the paper. Take it to Karen. She can use it to wallpaper her delusions. They left without another word, but by lunchtime, I realized the real games had only just begun. That afternoon, every mailbox on my road, including mine, had a new flyer from the Willow Bluff Community Association. Glossy, professional-looking, and full of flowery phrasing, it read like a political ad wrapped in suburban paranoia. Is Jared Miller's land part of the community? It asked in bold letters, followed by paragraphs about how ambiguous zoning lines and uncooperative adjacent residents were creating uncertainty and tension in an otherwise harmonious neighborhood. I read it twice, half expecting to find the words "Vote to seize the garage" buried in there. I tossed the flyer into the fire pit. The next day, I started noticing people walking past my property more often, not just joggers or the occasional dog walker. I mean groups. Couples with phones in hand, some of them pointing toward the garage, snapping pictures from across the road. One lady wearing yoga pants and the expression of someone who'd never changed a tire in her life had the gall to walk right up to my fence and start taking photos of the building's side paneling. I stepped outside, leaned against my post, and said, "You lost? Or just casing the place?" She jumped like she'd seen a ghost and scurried off without a word. I watched her speed walk all the way back to Willow Bluff, then turned back inside and did the only logical thing. I ordered new locks, upgraded the camera system, and started a fresh manila folder labeled Evidence, HOA Harassment. That same evening, I got a phone call. No caller ID. The voice on the other end was filtered, someone using one of those text-to-speech apps. "You really should consider cooperation, Jared," the voice said. "This doesn't have to be hard." I paused for a beat. "Karen, is that you? Did the neighborhood newsletter lose funding so you had to go full Batman villain?" The call ended. I filed a police report about the flyers and the suspicious visitors, not because I thought the cops could do anything. I just wanted a paper trail. The officer on the line sounded sympathetic, but unconvinced. "Sounds like a bad HOA situation, sir. Not much we can do unless they physically step onto your property." I hung up and walked out to the garage. The place was locked up, cameras running, perimeter lights online. But still, I felt a chill that wasn't from the wind. The air had shifted. It wasn't just letters and passive aggression anymore. It was targeted, coordinated. They were trying to make me feel surrounded, outnumbered, like some rogue outpost refusing to join the Federation. But I wasn't about to fold. I started documenting everything. Photos of the inspectors, screenshots of the flyers, clips from the camera feed showing strangers near my fence. I backed everything up to a private cloud and a USB drive, which I stored in the garage's locked safe, because something told me I'd need it all soon. And I was right. I didn't expect much to happen the first night after I upgraded the garage's security. But then again, I didn't expect any of this HOA nonsense to turn into a neighborhood-level siege either. I was in the kitchen around midnight, sipping stale black coffee and scrolling through the latest updates to Nevada's property rights laws. Yes, my reading habits had taken a dark turn when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. Rear perimeter. Garage. 0014 a.m. I stared at the screen. The notification had no image, just a red dot pulsing on the app's map. The infrared camera I'd installed behind the building wasn't the best quality in low light, and the wind sometimes triggered the sensors. Probably a rabbit or a drunk coyote. Still, I tapped in and waited for the feed to buffer. What I got was a hazy, grainy shape moving along the edge of the garage wall. Human height, slower than a jogger, more purposeful than a raccoon. The figure ducked out of view, and a second later, the feed glitched out for nearly a minute. By the time it came back, the frame was empty again. I tossed the blanket off my lap, slid on my boots, and grabbed the flashlight. When I got outside, everything looked normal. The locks were intact, lights off, doors shut, but the air smelled wrong. Disturbed, like someone had walked where they didn't belong. I swept the gravel path with my flashlight and spotted a pair of faint tire tracks that curved near the side entrance. Narrow, fresh, and not mine. I circled to the rear and found scuff marks on the dirt, right beneath the side panel where the security camera had glitched. I crouched down and felt the soil, compressed. Someone had been standing there, maybe fiddling with the wiring. But why not just break in? What the hell were they doing? I checked the lock, still in place, still untouched, but then I noticed something else. One of the bolts securing the latch looked cleaner, like it had been turned or replaced recently. My stomach sank. Someone had tested the door, maybe even opened it, and then locked it again behind them. I went back inside and pulled the backup footage from the overhead camera. Nothing useful. Just shadows, flickers, movement too low for the lens to catch properly. I zoomed in on the moment before the feed cut and saw the edge of a shoe. Hiking boot, not a brand I recognized. The next morning, I did a full sweep of the interior. Tools still in place, lifts untouched, nothing obviously missing, but something still felt off. There was a folding chair I didn't remember placing near the back wall, a used coffee cup in the trash that wasn't mine. One of the socket wrench trays had been shifted slightly, as if someone had brushed it while moving around. It wasn't vandalism, it wasn't theft, it was presence. Someone had been inside, quietly, carefully, watching. I tightened every bolt on the locks and added an internal latch on the side door, the kind you can only open from the inside. Then I bought 2 more cameras, smaller, infrared, higher quality, and wired them up along the interior. I also stuck a motion sensor near the roof beam and set it to ping my phone directly. I called the sheriff's office again and gave them the update. They told me, again, that without visible damage or stolen items, there wasn't much they could do. "I understand, Mr. Miller," the deputy said, "but unless you catch them in the act, it's all just suspicious circumstance. Keep documenting. And call us immediately if you see anyone on your land again." I almost asked if I could bait them legally, maybe leave a sign that said, "Free HOA supplies inside," and hide in the rafters with a bat. But I knew better. Instead, I started preparing for the next visit, because there was no doubt in my mind now they'd be back. And next time, I'd be ready. I spent the next few days in a haze of caffeine and paranoia. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker on a camera feed sent my heart racing. I'd served in combat zones, dealt with engine fires mid-air, even pulled a buddy out of a burning Humvee, and somehow this stupid HOA war was triggering a whole different kind of adrenaline, because it wasn't the noise of war I was facing. It was the silence of entitlement, the smug, creeping kind that comes dressed in polo shirts and faux legality, waving bylaws like they were constitutional amendments. They wanted in, and they'd already been inside once. So I stopped reacting and started planning. First thing I did was upgrade the cameras. The old wireless system I'd picked up at the hardware store wasn't cutting it. Too low res, too easy to jam. I swapped it out for a set of hardwired infrared units with night vision and redundant recording, one on each garage entrance, one high up in the rafters inside, one at the corner beam where I'd seen movement last time. I mounted another small one inside a dusty toolbox with a pinhole lens facing the main entrance. A 6th unit, the most important, was installed behind a false smoke detector above the overhead beam, giving me a full interior view. Then came the microphones. I rigged 2 directional mics to record conversations inside the structure, synced with the cameras, and routed to a cloud drive. The motion sensors I installed would activate everything at the first sign of movement, and send instant notifications to my burner phone, which I kept on me at all times. Next came the physical setup. I moved all my valuable tools and equipment into the rear section of the garage and locked them behind a steel cage, reinforced with a bar lock and covered with a tarp to make it look like just another pile of clutter. Then I strategically cleaned up the front half, moved the folding table near the entrance, left some empty plastic totes nearby, scattered a few shovels and rakes against the wall, made it look inviting, available, like a guy who is in the middle of packing up or maybe just about to offer a little community cooperation. I even went so far as to unlock the outer padlock just a bit. enough to let the hasp hang freely without it being obvious. If someone tried the door, they'd find it open and assume they'd lucked out. And then the pièce de résistance. I left town, or at least I made it look like I did. Thursday evening, I packed my truck with a few bags, tossed in a cooler, made a show of strapping down some gear. I waved at the jogger from Willow Bluff as I pulled out of my driveway, the same guy who always seemed to time his runs past my place right when something controversial was happening. He didn't wave back, just stared. I drove exactly 7 miles up the ridge, circled back on the old logging road, and parked my truck in the shadow of an abandoned hunting cabin. From there, I had a clear signal to all 6 cameras and a full view of the property through my drone, which I launched from the hill and parked above my tool shed roof, hidden in plain sight. Then I waited. For hours, nothing happened. The feeds were dead still. Crickets, the occasional rabbit, a late-night owl swooping past the lens. Midnight came and went, then 1 a.m., then 2. I started to think maybe they'd lost their nerve. But at exactly 3:16 a.m., the system pinged. Motion detected. Garage entrance. Interior camera triggered. I tapped open the feed and froze. 2 figures entered through the side door. 1 male, 1 female. The man was thin, balding, wearing a Willow Bluff polo and khaki pants. The woman I couldn't see clearly at first, but her posture was unmistakable. Arms folded tightly, head tilted back, just enough to look down her nose at the world. Karen. They stepped inside, casually, like they owned the place. The man flipped on a flashlight, scanning the open area. Karen held a folder and what looked like a tape measure. "Didn't I tell you?" Her voice rang out in the crisp night audio. "He's not coming back until Sunday. He's probably drunk at some biker festival or whatever it is these people do." The man chuckled. "We should be able to fit at least 12 bins along this wall. Maybe put the generator in the corner." Karen set the folder down on the table I'd left by the entrance and began laying out papers, schematics, from what I could see. She walked to the far side of the garage and started measuring the wall. "We'll get the shelving units delivered tomorrow," she said casually. "He won't even notice. And if he does, we'll call it a misunderstanding. He's too isolated to fight it." The man nodded. "We should still lock it behind us, though." "Oh, definitely," she said. "We don't want anyone from the actual neighborhood thinking they can use it without going through us." I leaned back in my truck seat, jaw clenched so tight it felt like my teeth would crack. Not only had they trespassed, they were actively planning to convert my property into their storage facility. They had documents, delivery plans. They were talking about community access rules like this was a public resource, like I wasn't even a factor. The woman moved toward the rear section but stopped short when she saw the cage. "That's locked," she muttered. "Probably junk. Let's keep everything up front." The man dropped something heavy by the door, a metal toolbox. He stretched, looked around, and said, "We should be done before sunrise." "Karen, are you sure this is legal?" She hesitated. "It will be. We have signatures, and if he causes problems, we'll bring up the code complaints. Say he's been storing hazardous materials. The board will back us." I hit record manually, though I didn't need to. The system had it all. At 4:11 a.m., they locked the side door, turned off the flashlight, and disappeared into the dark. I waited until 6 to drive back in. I didn't want to risk a confrontation, not yet. Not until it was official. By noon, I'd already burned 5 copies of the footage onto flash drives and had one express mailed to my attorney. Then I called the sheriff's office. "Deputy, I need you to come down to my property. I've got video evidence of illegal entry, trespassing, attempted occupation, and conspiracy to commit fraudulent use of private land." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Sir," the deputy said slowly, "did you say conspiracy?" "Yes," I replied, "and I've got every damn word of it on camera." The deputy's cruiser pulled into my gravel driveway at precisely 3:24 that afternoon. Sunlight bounced off the windshield like a warning flare as the vehicle slowed to a stop just outside the garage. The very same building that, less than 12 hours ago, had hosted an uninvited HOA reconnaissance mission. Deputy Colton stepped out, adjusting his belt with the kind of weary professionalism that told me he was already bracing for paperwork. I liked Colton, young but sharp, ex-military, like me, and the only one in the local department who didn't treat HOA complaints like kids bickering over whose lawnmower was louder. "You said you've got footage," he said by way of greeting. I nodded and led him inside the house, where my laptop was open on the dining table. I'd queued up the timestamp from 3:16 a.m. on the dot and clicked play. He watched in silence. No comments, no questions. Just took it all in. Karen entering, clipboard in hand, giving orders like she was reviewing blueprints for an invasion. Then the man, later identified as Greg Walters, the HOA vice president, dropping off the metal box, talking about bins, shelving, codes. By the time Karen said, "We'll call it a misunderstanding," Colton was scribbling in his notebook. When she floated the idea of saying I was hoarding hazardous material, his eyebrows twitched. And when she confirmed they had board signatures to make it legal later, he finally looked up. "Well," he said, voice dry, "that's not something you hear every day." I handed him a USB stick. Full footage, 3 angles, synced audio, time-coded, backups already with my attorney. He nodded. "Mind showing me the site?" We walked out to the garage. I hadn't touched a thing since their visit. The toolbox still sat near the door. Karen's folder was open on the table, schematic printouts half-curled from the early morning dew. The tape measure was still hanging off a nail on the wall, like they were planning to return and finish the job. Colton took photos of everything. Then he opened the folder, whistled softly. "Look at this," he said, flipping through the pages. "Schedule for equipment delivery. HOA budget allocations. This isn't some spur-of-the-moment trespass. They were staging." He paused, looked at me. "Do you want to press charges?" I didn't even blink. "Absolutely." By 4 p.m., a second cruiser had arrived. Officers took statements, gathered evidence, and bagged the documents as part of an official investigation into unlawful entry and attempted misappropriation of private property. Greg and Karen weren't arrested, not yet, but they were formally named in the incident report. At 5:30, Karen herself showed up. She pulled into my driveway in her spotless white SUV, stepped out like she was arriving at a garden party, and walked up to me with the tight smile of a woman who thought charm could outrun consequences. "Jared," she said, voice sugary, "I heard there was some kind of misunderstanding." I held up my hand. "Karen, save it. The sheriff's department is already inside. They have the footage, your folder, your voice on tape. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's trespassing, conspiracy, fraud." Her smile didn't falter, not quite, but her eyes sharpened, calculating. "I think you're overreacting. We were simply trying to arrange a temporary community resource. It's not like we damaged anything." "You were inside my garage at 3 in the morning, I said, "with someone from your board, planning to store property, without my knowledge. After I told you twice, in writing, that you have no authority here." She shifted gears. "Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. I'm sure we can come to an understanding. If you're willing to drop this and meet with the board." I stepped closer. "Karen, if you speak one more word about understanding, I swear to God, I will show every neighbor in Willow Bluff the security footage of you measuring my wall like you were flipping a house on HGTV." Her mouth opened, then shut. Colton stepped out of the garage then, holding the evidence bag. "Ms. Bradshaw," he said, tone clipped, "you're going to need to come down to the station later this week to give a formal statement. Please don't tamper with any documents or reach out to anyone involved in this incident before that." Karen blinked. "Am I being charged?" "Not today," he replied, "but the district attorney will be reviewing everything we've collected, including the audio recordings." I watched the moment it sank in. Her posture stiffened, chin rising a fraction. The president mask slipped just for a second, and beneath it, there was panic. She turned without another word and walked briskly to her SUV. That night, I cracked a beer and sat on the tailgate of my truck, watching the footage again. Not because I needed to. I'd practically memorized it. But because it felt good to know I wasn't crazy, that someone finally saw it too. They'd crossed a line, and now it was public. It was legal. It was mine to pursue. The next morning, I received a call from the county clerk's office. A familiar voice, Mercy, who handled zoning and property disputes in our district. She sounded confused. "Jared, hey, listen, we had a request come through a few weeks ago from the Willow Bluff HOA. They submitted a revised plat map. Claimed there was an administrative oversight and that your garage technically falls under their boundary lines." I felt my stomach tighten. "You approved it?" No, she said quickly. "It wasn't properly signed by a surveyor. Looked odd. We flagged it, but I thought you knew. They never followed up, and since it was unofficial, we shelved it. But now, with this sheriff's report, I pulled it up again." I drove down to the clerk's office that afternoon and asked to see the revised map. Marcy handed it over in a manila envelope, and there it was. A scanned map with faint ink lines scratched into the parcel boundaries, drawn just far enough east to pull my garage into the HOA zone. On the edge, in neat blue ink, someone had written "Correction per oversight. See 1998 agreement." There was no such agreement. I'd inherited the land from my uncle, who'd specifically carved it out of the HOA when the original tract was subdivided. I had his old deeds, the county land registry, even a notarized letter from the original developer saying the property was always meant to remain independent. And now, someone was forging maps to steal it back. I asked Marcy for a certified copy and walked straight to the district attorney's office. The DA wasn't in, but her assistant, a young, bright-eyed guy named Lennox, took one look at the package I handed him and raised his eyebrows. "This came from the HOA." I nodded. They tried to use it to justify breaking into my garage. He flipped through the folder, pulled out the revised map, and whistled. This wasn't done by a surveyor. These edits aren't even digitally layered. They just drew on top of the scan. That's not just sloppy. That's illegal. Forgery? I asked. If they tried to pass this off as official to pressure you? Absolutely. He slid the folder back to me. The DA will want to see this. Bring everything, and I mean everything. Video, audio, statements, anything HOA related. We might be looking at more than trespassing here. And so, for the next 2 days, I built my own little war chest. I printed out every letter Karen had ever sent me, including the passive-aggressive community wellness survey she'd once tried to frame as a mandatory participation form. I dug up emails from years back where she'd tried to get me to voluntarily join the HOA, her exact wording, citing shared interest in the community landscape. Then came the recent stuff, the unsigned demand for cooperation, the second letter. With board signatures, the flyer's neighbors had shown me where they falsely claimed my land was historically part of Willow Bluff. The rumors about me hoarding hazardous materials. I filed all of it chronologically, with dates, sender info, and screenshots. I also compiled footage from the cameras, not just the break-in, but days prior, when strange HOA inspectors walked around my perimeter, snapping photos and mumbling to each other. One guy even held up a clipboard and started measuring my fence. I cross-referenced license plates, ran background checks through a friend in private security, and confirmed at least 3 of them were HOA board members. On the 3rd day, I got a call from my attorney, Michelle Darnell. I'd worked with her once before on a permit dispute and trusted her more than anyone else in town. "I've reviewed everything," she said. "This is bigger than it looks. They didn't just trespass. They coordinated a campaign of defamation, forged zoning documents, and tried to seize private property through soft coercion. So, what do? We file a civil suit. Libel, defamation, attempted appropriation, unlawful entry, fraud. Then we notify the zoning commission and district attorney. This qualifies as criminal. They misrepresented legal documents to influence land governance. That's a felony." I didn't say anything for a moment. My head was spinning, not because of the scale, but because of how quiet and sneaky it had all been. Karen didn't kick down doors or scream in my face. She'd simply tried to rewrite the map until the world matched her wishes. And now she was going to have to answer for it. Michelle continued, "Get ready. Once the suit's filed and the DA opens investigation, the HOA will come apart at the seams. These kinds of people, they don't handle exposure well." Later that night, as I walked the perimeter of my land, floodlights humming gently, cameras blinking in steady rhythm, I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. Just outside the fence, at the far corner near the public easement, someone had spray-painted a crude line across the dirt. A new boundary. My garage was still untouched. My locks still held. But the line in the dirt was their last quiet message. "We still believe this is ours." And now, I was ready to make sure they learned, the hard way, that it wasn't. By the time Michelle filed the lawsuit, the storm had already begun to form over Willow Bluff. We didn't just go in with a single complaint, we launched a legal barrage. 8 civil counts: trespass, libel, slander, defamation, fraudulent misrepresentation, attempted appropriation, unlawful surveillance, and emotional distress. That last one might have been overkill, but Michelle insisted on it. "They don't respect your property or your peace of mind. Let's make the court see both were violated." The morning the case went live, a court clerk leaked the filing summary, and within an hour, my phone was buzzing like a wasp nest on a hot day. Neighbors, reporters, even one HOA board member, not Greg, but one of the lesser-known silent voters, called to say he had no idea things had gone so far and wanted to distance himself from the board's actions. I told him the sheriff might want to hear that. Instead, by noon, the district attorney's office announced they were officially opening a criminal inquiry into HOA operations. The forged plat map had triggered something bigger, a review of all zoning and structural documents the HOA had submitted in the past 5 years. Apparently, Karen had been using revised documents as leverage more than once. Then came the subpoenas. Greg and Karen were both called in for formal interviews. Their emails were requested. Their personal HOA communications were seized. Michelle handed over everything we had. The audio, the video, the maps, the folder from the garage, even the damn spray-painted dirt line I'd photographed. Details matter, she said. And people like Karen think they're above them. Karen's public persona cracked fast. First, she issued a vague statement to local media, claiming she deeply regretted any confusion regarding jurisdictional boundaries. Then she stopped showing up to community events altogether. Rumor had it she'd hired a separate lawyer, not for HOA matters, but for herself personally. But the real gut punch came when the county zoning inspectors submitted their findings. Turns out, the HOA had been storing materials for future community projects in a private rented storage unit, one that was leased under Karen's name, not the HOA's. Heron. They'd collected over $60,000 in landscape improvement dues from residents and squirreled it away into what Michelle called a gray fund. When questioned, Karen claimed they were holding the funds until a better storage location could be acquired. That better location, of course, was my garage. We now had financial misconduct on the table, unauthorized use of dues, personal benefit from HOA funds, conspiracy to seize non-HOA property for HOA use. Michelle updated the suit to include 2 more civil counts, misappropriation of communal funds and abuse of authority. The board panicked. Half of them resigned within 72 hours. Greg vanished from public view. Karen called a closed emergency meeting, but nobody showed up except her. Meanwhile, my lawyer filed an injunction preventing any HOA members from stepping foot on my property line. A new sheriff's deputy started parking his cruiser just down the road every night. Silent presence, unmissable message. Still, they tried one last time. On a Tuesday evening, around sunset, a pair of HOA volunteers walked up to my driveway holding clipboards and tote bags. When I stepped outside, one of them smiled nervously and said, "We just wanted to talk. Maybe resolve things amicably." Amicably, I repeated. Is that before or after someone forged a map to steal my land? The other one, younger, sweating, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I stepped closer. "You're trespassing. There's a legal order on file. You want to talk? Talk to my attorney." They left without another word. I watched them hustle back to their car and drive off, brake lights flickering like retreat flares. That night, I walked through the garage with a different feeling. Not victory, not yet, but the stillness before justice drops. The silence in the air before a courtroom gavel ends years of quiet abuse. I passed by the spot where Karen's folder had been left, paused by the shelf where Greg installed that unauthorized bracket, and clicked off the overhead lights. They'd picked the wrong man, the wrong garage. And now the law agreed. The hearing date was set for the following month, but by the time we reached the courthouse steps, the case had already broken the back of Willow Bluff's HOA. Karen Bradshaw, once the unshakable president with her pressed suits and weaponized HOA manuals, arrived flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they'd just lost a bet. Her posture was upright, but her eyes were hollow, the kind of look people wear when they realize they're not just caught, they're replaceable. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Local news crews had managed to grab access, and a few of my neighbors, the ones who used to avoid eye contact, now sat behind me, suddenly invested in property rights and oversight. Funny how quickly the weather changes once someone finally holds up a mirror to the storm. The proceedings were merciless. Michelle took the floor and laid out the full timeline. Documents, footage, forged maps, audio transcripts. She spoke without theatrics, just the facts, line by line, violation by violation. And when she played the video of Karen standing in my garage, clipboard in hand, saying, He's on vacation. It'll be gone by Wednesday. The courtroom held its breath. Karen's defense was a jittery string of deflections, miscommunication, clerical error. She even tried to argue that the board had interpreted zoning ambiguities in good faith, but the judge wasn't buying it. In good faith, he repeated, glancing over the fraudulent plat map, is not a legal shield for drawing on county documents with a pen. Then came the criminal charges. The district attorney formally charged Karen and Greg with falsification of legal records, attempted unlawful seizure of private property, misappropriation of HOA funds, and abuse of administrative authority. 4 counts, 2 of them felonies. Their bail was set on the spot. They didn't leave through the front doors. They left through a side entrance, escorted by deputies. The courthouse buzzed like a nest of hornets. As part of the civil ruling, the judge awarded me $120,000 in damages, enough to recoup the legal fees, replace my upgraded security system, and still put some aside for the next project. But what I valued more was the injunction. The HOA was permanently barred from contacting me, accessing my land, or making any claims regarding jurisdiction. Ever. More than that, the judge declared the Willow Bluff HOA administratively incapacitated. The county appointed a temporary manager to audit and oversee its dissolution. Turns out, once you peel back the smug bylaws and golf cart patrols, most of these little tyrannies are just badly managed pyramids. And when the top falls, so does the rest. 2 months later, a metal county sign went up on the old community board near the entrance to Willow Bluff. Willow Bluff HOA. Status revoked. No one tore it down. As for me, I installed new motion-triggered lights around the garage. Not because I was scared, I just liked watching the place light up like a fortress whenever a rabbit hopped past. I also replaced the old private property sign with a custom-made steel plaque. Private property, no trespassing. We don't call HOA, we call the law. It got a few chuckles from passing hikers. One guy even asked if he could get one for his cabin. I told him I'd send him the link. A few months after the dust settled, I got a letter, real letter, not email, from a state senator's office. Someone had flagged my case during a land use oversight meeting. They wanted me to speak at a community governance panel about homeowner rights and HOA reform. Apparently, I'd become a minor case study. I still haven't decided if I'll go. But it felt good to know that someone, somewhere, saw what happened and thought, maybe this means something. Now when people walk past my land, they don't ask, why do you need a garage that big? They nod. Some wave. And nobody, not a soul, tries to tell me what to do with it.